Today, we're going to talk about essays and personal statements.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have an interview with Suzanne Davis. She's the owner of Academic Writing Success. And we're going to talk a lot about personal statements and applications and supplemental essays and all the things that students need to write in order to complete their applications for college and also perhaps pursue scholarships as well. So on the scholarship theme, in Brad Recommends, I'm going to get into the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents, a great resource you can learn a little bit more about right after we have this interview. So as I mentioned, the challenge with writing for many families is understanding what it's going to take to actually get accepted and how to recognize good writing when you see it. I've been working with my son, and one of the challenges that we had was I'm not a writer, and I can't really coach and deal with the writing side of the application. So we worked with a family friend who spent a few hours with my son, probably more than a few, it was probably 6 or 7 hours, to work out how to write the essays and come up with a good topic and that type of thing. So if you're looking to learn more about the writing process, Suzanne's going to give us a great overview and talk a little bit more about how she helps families in the writing process. And then stay tuned for the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents. Let's jump into the interview. Today, we're talking with Suzanne Davis. She's the owner of Academic Writing Success. Welcome, Suzanne.
Welcome, and thank you for having me today.
All right. So you own a company called Academic Writing Success. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is and why you decided to launch the company?
Okay, so Academic Writing Success is a coaching center and a kind of this combination of coaching and tutoring where I help students that want to excel in their writing classes, if it's to get into college or in college, or even some students down the road with graduate school. And really, I came into this because I had been teaching at the university level, and I had been teaching academic writing and academic writing combined with ESL there. And I really believed in that one-on-one connection that I had with students. And so I would have that office meeting with every single writing student for 15 minutes every week. And I realized my office hours were longer than any other professors. And I was going almost 15 office hours, and I couldn't keep that up, but I felt like students really needed that. And so I knew I wanted to go into working one-on-one with students. I learned about doing it online, and I thought, this is the way I can help people from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you tell us a little more about what coaching is versus, say, like what an editor might do or other writing professionals?
Okay, so with coaching, I'm really guiding students from the beginning of the whole writing process. So how do you brainstorm? How do you come up with ideas? Things like, how do you find research or evidence to prove your ideas? Write that thesis statement. And all of those pieces, plus I do some teaching as we're doing that. So I might notice in this writing piece that they really struggle with sentence fragments, right? So that's something that has to be solved going forward. And so as a coach, I'm helping them go through that entire process, but I'm also pulling out from their writing, okay, here are some sentence fragments. This is what a sentence fragment is. And then how can we fix that and do that in your own writing? So it's more personalized than editing, where I do have people in the past who wanted editing, and they just send me a piece and they say, fix it. And that's very, very different.
Hmm. Right. So I guess if, where you're relevant to the folks that are typically listening to this podcast, which is, parents of high school kids looking at college, I think, and is things like scholarship essays and personal statements and their applications and that kind of stuff. But can you help parents understand, I think sometimes parents think that, oh, I'm a good writer. I'm going to just jump in there and help my student do this. And I think a lot of times they're not really coaching the student to write something. They're just writing it for them or with the student sitting next to them. How do you work with a student? How do you draw that line to make sure that it's still the student's work and not your work, so to speak? That's part A. And the reason I bring this up is I hear from a lot of college side, people that read the writing that say they can very easily tell when it wasn't written by a student. So the idea that, well, mom or dad is just going to knock it out and get it done and it'll be good enough and then we don't have to worry about it generally doesn't work very well.
No, it doesn't. Because one of the things that colleges are really looking at in that application process is not just the writing ability and the content, but kind of this elusive thing called writing voice. They want to have a sense of that student through that piece of writing. And they want to understand the student's values too, which come through in a personal statement, just based on some of the questions that they're asking. And parents can't quite replicate that. And I can't replicate that either. So when I work with a student and I'm coaching them, it's yes, we're looking at the prompt, but also while I'm doing that process with them, I'm designing what we call free writing activities. And so these are writing activities where we just start off for 5 or 10 minutes and they have a prompt. It's usually something that's related in some way to their topic or to the whole situation around going to college. And it's no pressure. I'm not going to grade it. I'm not thing like that. But their voice is coming through and their ideas are coming through. And that's really a great starting point for every time we coach. One of my clients, what she said she loved about me was that I didn't change who she was and her style when we were going through. I could give feedback on the content and how it's organized, and I could point out, there's things here that really aren't clear. But I also could say, here's some things we could do, but this always depends on you and what you want to convey.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have your own way of expressing things. I never want to be the person to take over just by applying certain writing rules.
Right. Okay.
And that student wound up doing really well,
Right.
because it was her own work.
Right. So, and I think that's important and again, I know very little about writing personally. It's not my area of expertise, obviously. But when we're, I guess, needing to do writing, how does a parent understand when maybe the writing isn't up to par? And again, I believe that I can recognize some writing from maybe a technical standpoint of you don't understand comma rules, obviously. You need a lot of work on
Right.
this. But how do you recognize if it's a good topic or some of that more broad thoughts for parents? If they're kind of the front line here, they might see the problem or they might not. So how do they recognize, well, this truly is a problem or not?
Okay. There are a couple things I would suggest, and that's getting feedback outside of the parent, whether it's your child is at a school where maybe the guidance counselor will look over something, or a teacher, or some other adult that's more familiar with what's expected. I have the free consultations where I look and I can give that feedback. And the other piece is there's books on how to write personal statements out there where they give you sample ones. There's one written by, I can't remember his name, but he goes by the college essay guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has examples like that. So kind of
Is that
going through,
Ethan
yeah,
Sawyer?
it's
The essay guy? Ethan
yes,
Sawyer? Yeah, it's Ethan
yeah,
Sawyer. Yes. And we'll put a
yes.
link to his book and his website as well.
He's very good
Right.
with it. You can even go on his websites and look at some of the examples and how he's explained certain things. So that will help give the parent a better eye.
Mm-hmm.
But I also recommend, have your child read through this with you. Start talking about that piece of writing and why do they think it works? What's really neat and unusual and working about that.
Right. Absolutely. So I think there's a challenge, and this is kind of an observation that I've made. If you had a student that said, "Hey, Mom, I'd really love to learn how to play the piano." If you happen to know how to play the piano, well, then you theoretically could say, "All right, well, sit down. I'll start teaching you." But if you don't know how to play the piano, and most of us don't, the first thought is, okay, well, piano lessons. And then you might go beyond that and say, well, okay, in-person piano lessons, but maybe there's the online piano lessons now and that type of thing where, and my son taught himself guitar by using online courses. So it certainly is possible. But when we get into writing, kind of we're in the same boat, I think. But people don't think of it that way of, wow, I'm in over my head when it comes to coaching on writing. I could learn the mechanics of writing and then learn how to be a good writing coach, or I could just outsource it to someone that does this all the time. I mean, I think those are the real decisions that parents need to think through of, if I can't handle it, do I want to spend the time and effort to become good enough at it? Or like I said, just hand it off and, again, find the resource, the book, the coach, whatever is appropriate for the situation. So I guess getting back to things like the personal statement and scholarship applications, you mentioned a few things while we were talking that you do that are kind of above and beyond. So the idea of, it not being generic, right? You write one essay that might be really good, but then you use it for 23 scholarships is probably not the right process. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Right. Well, I do a lot with students who are going towards those smaller, more specific scholarships or the scholarships that are available through their college. And those places, those unique places have different values and different reasons for why they're offering scholarships. And so you want to be able to speak to that every time you apply. So maybe your story is similar, but you want to make sure that when they're reading it, the sponsors, they're not feeling that this is something everybody has written and sent off. And I find for most, they actually do have very different questions. I do a lot with credit unions and businesses and those types of things. So it's not just a matter of, here's my basic essay, let me tweak it. And okay, it's set. I really want them, and I offer a course where I help them do this to study a sponsor,
Mm-hmm.
to look at their website, their values. A lot of them, it's really great because they have the winners and the winners' essays and things like that. So you can talk about those, and you can see how everything is very different.
Right. And I always use the example of, if you're getting a scholarship from the Little Old Lady Knitting Club, that might be a completely different essay than the skateboard company that's the edgy, crazy risk-taking kind of website or company. And so I think, again, that all this stuff kind of has been taken to the next level of maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago when parents were doing this. Well, you just knocked out something that was reasonably good and prove you could write, and you just submitted it everywhere. I don't think that works anymore. And what are you, I guess, as far as successes, and what are you seeing that's helpful and kind of turning the corner for students these days?
With the personal statements, I find really what's helping them is pulling out stories that are really unique and thoughts that are really unique to them are working. I had one student, she came to me and she was like, nobody died in my family. Nothing tragic has ever happened. I'm like, that's okay. We can write a really great essay together. You've got all of these different experiences and different ideas. And I had worked with her before, and she wrote a really great essay, and she got into Cornell, her first choice. And so I've worked with a lot of other students who, once they understand that and their points of view and the experiences that they've had, even though they're not like these, I don't know, big tragic experiences, it really works well because they're being very specific to these colleges. They have a really good understanding of why they want to go to a particular college. And I think that helps a lot with what they're picking out and what they're writing about.
Mm-hmm. So what's the process, when students are working on this? My son is a freshman in college and he had to write some essays, and we actually worked with a family friend that does a lot of writing and so forth. And, again, because I wasn't able to help, mom could have perhaps helped a little more, but because we're parents, sometimes I think the parents not being involved because the parent-child dynamic at 17, 18 is challenging sometimes. So a family friend helped my son, but, they worked on it a couple hours here and there, probably 6 meetings. So again, kind of setting expectations for parents that maybe haven't seen this process before. When a student says, I sat down on Sunday afternoon and 2 hours later they say, it's done. I'm going to go submit it now. It's probably not their best work. It might be good enough depending on the challenge, the types of schools you're applying to and that type of thing. But I had to spend a lot of time with my son and talk about, this is an important thing. This is something that you're going to write and rewrite and scrap and revise and think about. And it's not something like a typical English paper where you say, well, it's due tomorrow at noon and I haven't started it yet. Therefore, it's going to be what it's going to be. And then at noon, I'm going to submit it. Then there's no looking back.
Mhm.
Can you speak to that a little bit more about what colleges expect an essay, how that process works when you're working with students?
Well, the process that I go through with students is really starting with that brainstorming process, really trying to find like the story or the topic idea that's really going to approach. And we actually spend a lot of time in that brainstorming process. And I use different brainstorming tools. Some of it's just, somebody just wants to do a list, somebody wants to do a mind map and think. And, there's other tools like Jamboard, which is virtual sticky notes, and going through that, and I'm asking a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
about each one to kind of give them something to think about so that they can evaluate. But it's always their choice kind of after that discussion, which one they're picking. Again, we look at the college, we look back at that prompt to really make sure that what they're picking is going to be that. And then so when I work with them, we organize what they're going to write. Okay, so this would be a good place to start with an introduction. And here's what you can do with the body, and I'm guiding them through this. I'm asking them a lot of questions. And then if I see it's like wandering or kind of going so far off topic, that's where I'm kind of asking more of those questions and referring back to the prompt to kind of bring them on track. And then once they have that idea, it doesn't have to be like this formal outline, but this idea and this shape, it's really up to them to do the writing and then get the feedback from me. And I call that like revising feedback. And then also, editing and really that finalizing proofreading piece. But I find going through all of these steps and kind of asking questions at different points really helps make the essay more sharp. And I feel like it's not like it has to be an exact match with, the specific question and language, but it does help really make it something that's very unique, addresses the question, and is going to really stand out.
Mhm. So I guess what I'm kind of hearing is in the process, it's the kind of the broad topic is the first challenge of this is kind of what we're going to write about. And then somehow you need to come up with some sort of outline, or again, you might say, I'm going to write about the challenge when I played in sports, which is probably cliche and not something you want to write about, but assume that's the topic. Then you might need to talk about specifically, these are some of the outlined items, right? These are the bullet points that we're going to cover. And that,
Mhm.
but then from there, you still have to make it entertaining or, good writing per se.
Right.
And then from
Yeah.
there, you have to make sure your spelling's accurate and your punctuation and other things that I probably don't know anything about. But can you kind of speak to what each of those phases and what students might look for, or parents, and broaden that a little bit?
Okay. Well, I look for a really good introduction, something that's going to capture somebody's attention. So we do spend a lot of time thinking of like what might be a really good entry or kind of hook into this. So a lot of times it might be something where if it is a story or it is an experience, it might be something like some sort of description kind of leading into that or some kind of reflection. Not something that's going to sound like this was the most meaningful thing to me, and then lead in and it's just, here's my thesis statement and all of that. So I do look for things that are different. And that's what we try and come up with. Students really find that fun. I mean, they love coming up with different types of introductions and thinking about, ways to write it and trying it a few different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and coming back. So, in a conclusion like that, and then just different points in the writing where they might have, a metaphor or some turns of phrases that are really unique and interesting that they like to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, it seems like you're very focused on the content a lot more than the run-on sentences, grammar.
Well, I certainly am when we reach the editing
Right. Okay. So then there is an
phase.
editing phase as well.
Yes.
Okay.
There definitely is, because some of the common problems that I see are sentence fragments, which I was surprised. It seems like it's become more common to see sentence fragments over the years from when I first started. But a lot of them are things like somebody will start with like this really long kind of flowing clause. And then they just kind of forget they've got this whole noun, but then there's no actual action that they've finished with, or they put the period and it's the next sentence that actually would make it a real sentence. So we have that editing process that is really needed
Mhm.
because we have sort of the fun creative process. There's this saying from a lot of fiction authors like write hot, kind of do that and do that in that excited phase, but then edit cold.
Mhm.
So we have that break. And then we've really got to think like, I have a list of questions and like an editing checklist that, I teach them into different things. So they're spotting things and I'm spotting things. And then, you know, I help them proofread like crazy
Mhm.
because they do want that grammar, that spelling, and that punctuation to be perfect.
Right. Okay, so start to finish, if it's a high stakes, if we're looking at some of the high end schools, like you mentioned, Cornell and that type of thing, how long did that process take? You started working on Tuesday and by Friday afternoon it was done, or we started in August and by October it was done, or what's a good timeline or whatever that a parent might, again, in coaching the student a little bit about, this is something I'd done, right? To tell him, this is not, you're going to write it and rewrite it, rewrite it, and then you're going to edit it, and then maybe you'll start over. And he didn't like to hear that because writing the essay was not something that was high on his list of fun, but that is what happened. So what are you typically seeing as far as timelines or?
Timelines, I usually see, well, depending upon the student, I might see somebody at like 4 lessons, but we do spread that out because I do want to give them time to write a draft. I don't want to just say, okay, Monday through Thursday, we're going to write this, because they need the time to actually sit down, write, and probably give feedback as they can rewrite it. So I usually find like 4 lessons, 5 lessons, perhaps based on, that particular student and their kind of writing brainstorming process and what they might need. It might take just a little bit longer than that.
Okay.
But I find, if you can start, in that summer, like August, and do it over a month, I think that's a really good time.
Okay. So a month. Because I think I know when I work with parents that, sometimes we're going to delve into a topic where it's going to need to be 2 or 3 meetings. And if you delve into it in January and say, all right, we're going to reconvene in June, you're going to start over because by June, everybody forgot everything that happened in the first meeting. So you can't spread it out too far either. So what do you think is ideal? Is a month or month and a half ideal, or
I would say a month.
Okay. So
yeah.
And then 4 or 5 meetings in there where you might do some coaching and editing and all that type of thing. So, okay, I think that's helpful. Now, and that's typically for one piece, like a personal statement or a supplemental, or would we do multiple things in parallel at the same time? Oh, I want to do these 4 scholarships and a personal statement, and we're going to do it all in parallel, or should it's better to do one at a time?
I like to do their first choice first.
Okay.
And then after that, we start working on their other ones, because a lot of them, their first choice is like an early decision.
Okay.
But after we've done it that first time, it doesn't take a month, because they've already gone through the process. So maybe it's just one time working on it, and then me going ahead and spending some time and, revising it and doing that editing and meeting with them one more time.
Right.
So it's different. But that first time, I really do like a month.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about your services then, and how you mentioned that you offer a free consultation. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works and what you'd want up front? Do you need to have some writing in hand for that consultation to be useful, as an example? Or where would you start?
They certainly don't need to have a piece of writing there. I really want to get at what their goals are, but also start asking them, tell me what you want, tell me what your struggles are. If it's somebody who's applying to school, okay, what schools are you applying to? What are you worried about with that? Deadlines, things like that. And if we have time, it's usually about half an hour, and they want me to look at like a small piece, I can give feedback on that. Or afterwards, if they have a short piece of writing, they can send that to me, and I'm not going to edit it or any of that, but I can give them just a little bit of, comments and things like that.
Right. Can you describe the type of student that you work best with? Is there, you like to work with the writing kids, the ones that write for fun and think writing's cool, or do you like to work with the kids that, you know, like I'm a math and science guy and my son's a math and science guy. We don't, English is not something we enjoy. It's something we tolerate. Or does it matter? Or can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
It doesn't really matter. I like working with people, though, who are willing to learn. They don't have to be people who are, oh, yes, writing. My favorite part of the application process is that personal statement. I wasn't even that person. I spent time looking at colleges where I wouldn't have to have a personal statement. Like, that's how reluctant I was. So, yes, I work with those students. I love working with them too.
Right.
And it's kind of like, we're going to go through this together. It's not as scary as you think. And here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're breaking it down. And, bringing out their strengths, so their ideas about the content and what to put in it, what's going to excite them.
Right. Okay. And then I guess on the flip side, though, the student needs to have some reasonable motivation. And that's, we see this in a lot of areas around colleges. If mom is making me do it and my heart's not in it, it's often a waste of time in a lot of areas. I would assume your area as well. Have you?
It is not so much with the personal statement, because the personal statement, if they've already made that decision to go to college, they may not be thrilled about writing, but they want to complete that process. But there are other people who, maybe the student isn't even sure how they feel about college and they don't feel great about writing. I do ask a question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you to learn writing, or, to write a personal statement, whatever it is, and people are pretty honest with that 1 through 10 scale.
Right.
I don't have like, the parent is sitting right there as I'm asking that question. And so they're really honest with me, and I explain to them, well, this works best if you are motivated and you are willing to do the work, because I do ask you to do work outside of the session.
Right. Exactly. So, okay. So if people want to get in contact with you and learn more about your services and that type of thing, how can we find you?
Okay, well, definitely you can contact me through my website, which I think we'll have in the show notes, but it's www.academicwritingsuccess.com. So you can request a consultation through there. You also can email me, and email is pretty quick to reach me. So that's just sdavis@academicwritingsuccess.com. And social media, like I'm on my Facebook page. And so I check Messenger and all of those things. And I never mind if anybody just messages me.
Okay. Well, great.
Yeah.
Now, I guess you mentioned Facebook and some of those things. Are you actively putting out material that students or parents might be interested in receiving? Like, should they follow you on Facebook and that type of thing? Or I know there's a blog, at least on your website.
There is a blog. I tend to write longer blogs, and it's not every week because they're very detailed, but I do try and post content, whether it's a blog or not, on my Facebook page every week. And I have videos, older videos there, Facebook Lives. I'm going to be doing another one this month.
Okay.
And so that will be about scholarship writing.
Right. So if they're not ready to just jump in and get to work, there's a lot of resources and help that might get them started, and then they can reach out to you once they get stuck or need additional help. So.
Yes. And there's a lot on my blog. There really is. I've been blogging since 2017. So
right.
You can search that website and you will find a lot there.
Right. Okay. Well, I really appreciate it. This has been a great learning experience for myself, at least, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. All right, that was a great interview with Suzanne. I know I learned a ton. As always, all this information will be in the show notes, including links to Ethan Sawyer's book and his website, as well as links to Suzanne's website and contact information. Stay tuned for Brad Recommends, where we talk about the scholarship guide for busy parents.
The latest tips, tricks, and tools you can use today. This is Brad Recommends on Taming the High Cost of College.
Today, I'm recommending the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents. Now, the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents is a resource that I created. It's available on our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/scholarships, or just go into the resources tab. Now, the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents is a quick video course that helps parents understand the different types of scholarships and which types of scholarships may work for your family. So in the interview with Suzanne, we talked a little bit about the local smaller scholarships, which I think is a great strategy for many families. But to really understand what we're talking about, I think the Scholarship Guide is a great resource to kind of get you up to speed, because there are scholarships available at the colleges, and there are scholarships available from outside sources like charities and local corporations and school districts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of different ways to get scholarships, and the Scholarship Guide will go through the basics of what types of scholarships and that type of thing. And it's pretty quick. It's 4 short videos that will, like I said, get you up to speed so you know what you're getting into when it comes to scholarships. And then you can work with someone like Suzanne if you're going to pursue scholarships and need to improve your essays and applications for the scholarships to, again, increase your odds of actually winning a scholarship, because that's the ultimate goal. We don't want to just apply. We want to win the scholarship and then use that money for college, of course. So again, the Scholarship Guide is a free resource. It's available on the website. You can go check it out at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/scholarships. All right, that's all we have for today. I really appreciate you listening. As always, we appreciate any sort of reviews that you can provide. And feel free to check out the website and look at all the other things that we've got going on as well. That's all for this week. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.